Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Star Wars video. This is going to be my review for the Book of Boba Fett Chapter 1. So I might as well start by sort of explaining why I never really did any sort of trailer analysis or discussion about pretty much any of my thoughts about this show before we kind of just started the series here. The main reason for that is just that I felt from the trailers that there wasn't really too much to sort of speculate about, delve into. What they wanted to get across, I think, in the marketing campaign was just that it's going to be action. You know, Boba Fett in this era from The Mandalorian, it's going to be more of that. Are you excited about that? And obviously this first episode was very backstory focused, and it sort of leaves off at a point where it's sort of clear that there'll be at least a little bit more backstory as the series progresses. But what sort of has me a little bit skeptical, and part of the reason I didn't really want to dive into a lot of the trailers, was just that this whole plot of Boba is going to become the new crime lord of the sort of underworld, basically, is not the most interesting plot, at least to me. And it's the one thing that makes me kind of be like, okay, this episode was excellent, but it was because it was like 75% focused on the Boba Fett backstory. It answered a large part of the majority of questions we had about his survival and how he was here and there in The Mandalorian. And we don't have too many questions. There's still obviously going to be a little bit more, I guess, with the Tuskens to explain his sort of reappearance where we do see him in The Mandalorian. But it feels like for the most part, we are mostly caught up. So what exactly is the plot with him becoming the crime lord? Like, is it going to lead to anything? Or is it just getting across sort of what his moral code is? Because that's probably the only, like, I think, real thing I was able to grasp onto in this episode that makes that plot seem a little bit more interesting. But it's still just Boba Fett, the character, developing that a little bit more. And that is just that he seems to want to be the crime lord, crime boss, in a slightly different way than Bib Fortuna or Jabba, which is that he doesn't want to rule by fear. And all the trailers have got across the idea that he wants to be the kind of leader that lets people speak up, speak out, and doesn't rule through fear. He'll defend himself if he has to, as we saw in this episode with the attack that came in. But he doesn't want to have to rely on people just sort of worshipping him or being afraid of him the entire time. And you saw that in little parts, like with the Tusken Raiders, that he was not happy about seeing the kind of thugs, the sort of bad side of the sort of crime lord thing, where they attacked that guy and just sort of left him for dead. And you get the impression that he doesn't want to do that in what he's doing right now. Now, it does beg the question that, like, he still wants to be the crime boss ultimately. Like, I think he directly says that himself. Like, he literally says crime lord or something like that. So how does that work? Is he just going away from crime, but he's aware that he's technically in that position, or what? Like, that's going to be the sort of technical point that they have to go into with his character of, like, I assume he's still going to be some sort of a, character more towards the gray, because he used to be a bounty hunter and now he's this crime boss, just doing it slightly differently. But it doesn't necessarily seem like they're trying to frame him as like a leader character, like a just kind of leader necessarily. So that's what I'm unsure about. But it's obviously meant to be sort of, I suppose, partly the next stage of a lot of the kind of Clone Wars arcs, where we also had this sort of crime boss type style stuff going on, like with Maul and so on. And that's maybe the one thing that I'm kind of like wondering about. Is that the sort of stuff that's going to get referenced here? Because we seem to introduce sort of almost like a rival crime syndicate. who attacked him. Those are the sort of questions you have sort of coming out of this first episode. That's the bit I'm still a bit unconvinced on, is just, okay, we're here for like, what, 7 episodes is it, or something like that? What are we going to do across the remaining 6 episodes beyond just that arc of Boba Fett doing the crime boss thing in his own way, in line with his own sort of honor, I guess. But the core of this episode was, as we saw, the backstory, explaining effectively his entire story in between him falling into the Sarlacc pit in Return of the Jedi, all the way up to his appearance in The Mandalorian. Like I said, they left out a little bit with the Tuskens, but we ended off with him being sort of friendly, sort of ingratiated into their kind of group. So, it feels like for the most part we've done like 85-90% of the backstory storytelling. I like the way they did it, with the idea that in the present day he is taking sort of like Bacta baths to sort of heal himself from the injuries that he sustained during his sort of return back into the world, basically. And I like that it wasn't just used as a way to tell the backstory, that he remembers these tough times in his life while he's healing. It also plays a role in where he's at now with regards to, I suppose, just his condition. That these lingering injuries from this time still affect him. That he is still incredibly strong and skilled and powerful, but the hits that he takes start to have a little bit more of an effect, and you can tell that by the end of that fight, like, he was like, I need to get back to the Bacta bath, like, immediately. I have more healing to do. So I suppose the expectations would be that by in or around the end of the season, we maybe see a back to pretty much full strength Boba Fett, and we really see kind of what he's doing as the leader of the sort of criminal underworld, I guess, and what his plan is and all of this. So I did appreciate that, as like, yes, they used it twice to sort of jump us into the flashbacks, but that, watching where he's at with regards to his condition and health is actually a bit of a plot point, because if you're making a story about how he survived, you have to show that it had an impact. We saw that he was sort of scarred and damaged when we met him again. He's, for the most part, recovered from a lot of that stuff, but you can still see that there's a few wounds that are going to remain. And I like that. I think that was like a good way to do things, to use the technology of this world and not have him, I suppose, ultimately not have the actor need to put on so much makeup before he plays the role. It's just easier that way. But yeah, the details of how they did it, the Sarlacc, they got out of the way like pretty quickly. Like, I suppose just the mystery surrounding how did a resourceful bounty hunter get out of a giant monster, it made sense. Like, he was like knocked out because of the fall or whatever, and the damage from being in the stomach of a Sarlacc, but he woke up because he was in armor and stuff like that, and managed to fight his way out using his gadgets, and crawled his way up in the sands. His armor gets taken by the Jawas, and eventually is found and taken prisoner by the Tuskens. It's actually relatively simple storytelling, to the point. It's just that until you tell us what happened, it's hard to fully predict what way you kind of put it all together. But that all made sense. Like, his armor had to be taken to set up the whole plot with his armor in like season 2 of The Mandalorian. You show that he's injured and weak, which is why he can't really defend against the Jawas taking his armor, and why the Tuskens are able to take him captive. And that gets into sort of, in a way, like the meat of the episode, which is the Tuskens take him prisoner, and they do in this episode what they've been doing for pretty much most of the appearances of the Tuskens in the Disney Plus shows, which is doing some more world building on them and their culture, and just doing a good job at presenting sort of the other side of their presentation in the movies, as these sort of savages, effectively, as they are in basically all of the prequels and originals. And what you did in The Mandalorian and also here is present like, no, they are a tribe of people who have their own customs, and we saw some of that before, and we see a sort of slightly different tribe here with a different kind of look, a little bit of a different makeup, and that you can clearly see who the chief is, and you can see the sort of leadership family of this group of Tuskens, in that I guess the chief's son, I think that's the case, ends up being sort of a main character. And you see, I think what they do here is pretty good, in that like you see that like the kid wants to play more of a role in dealing with the prisoners, but there are a few times when Boba could have absolutely killed the kid, because he kind of absolutely had the beating of the kid even though he was weak. But he didn't do that, highlighting again the sort of code of honor, I guess, that Boba has, that he's unwilling to kill this Tusken kid just because he's captured. And that leads into sort of the second half of the episode, where, you know, after the escape attempt, and then he brings them out to like do the searching for the sort of fruit things that are under the sand that have water in them. And you see again that Boba at any point can overpower this kid, but chooses sort of not to, because it's just a kid. It's roughly at this point where he sees the other sort of thugs attack that house, and then we get into the big sort of proving moment of the episode, which sort of is what makes him friendly with the other Tuskens, even though I think you could sort of tell that earlier on in the episode they were sort of testing him before. And this gets into the whole idea of, you know, I suppose just us learning sort of what it is to kind of be a Tusken Raider, because this is where we get into the idea of like, my understanding of it is that it's not that the Tuskens are like a species as such. It's more that it's just a kind of way of life, I suppose, and they're already thinking like, is he kind of like worthy to kind of be one of us? And you sort of see at the end that they kind of do deem him worthy. So yeah, we get into the Rhodian prisoner is killed by this kind of monster that comes out of the sand. It's an interesting one in that it's sort of like a... What even way to describe it? It's like the Pokemon Machamp, because it has like 4 arms, but it's also got like a kind of quadruped body. It's a weird monster that we have here. I'm not sure what the kind of species name is on it, but it looked pretty cool. Definitely imposing without being sort of just like, no character could defeat this thing on its own, on their own. Interesting fight here, because what you had to sort of do in this fight was to get across that the kid is actually brave, and that he goes over to it and stabs it in the foot, but he clearly doesn't have the power to defeat it on his own. But Boba does, even though he gets smacked around a bit by it, even though he still has the chains on him. And again, it's this moment of like, after killing this thing, he could have escaped. Because again, I think the kid at this point realized that there's nothing he could do to stop Boba Fett from escaping. So that was a cool scene, because obviously they come back and the kid is holding the head which they cut off the monster. And obviously this is very significant to this tribe of Tuskens, in that everyone like congratulates the kid on, I suppose he's trying to take the credit for it. So I guess this thing has maybe been tormenting the tribe for a while, or just this species, if you kill one, is known to be a big thing if you do it. And Boba stays in the background, but I like that the chief sort of knows that, I guess, like, his son is just completely making up the story, and that Boba was the one who actually did most of this. And the fact that he came back shows some sense of, again, I suppose, honor between the two. So it was kind of significant that the chief was the one to hand the thing of water to Boba. And, you know, just realized that, like, oh, you did that. We were right to sort of see something within you. But it ends there. The flashback ends at that point. So the last thing here, I suppose, is just to show, I guess, Boba becoming part of this Tusken tribe, and then how he comes into contact. I suppose you have to show how he found Fennec and what that dynamic was at the start. Does he know her from before because they were both bounty hunters, or is that his first encounter with her? How did he help to save her life after that season 1 Mandalorian episode? Do they go into, you know, him finding the armor and show some kind of alternate views of scenes that we saw from him in the Mandalorian season 2? How far into the backstory do they go, I suppose, is the real question. The sort of ending scene of the Mandalorian season 2, did they go into more context behind that in terms of setting up that scene where he goes to take out Bib and so on? But I like what we got out of the backstory. It made this first episode feel very impactful, that we know him more as a character now. The rest of the scenes were, for the most part, just setting up the idea that Boba is still new to this. Like, he has a goal in mind, but he actually really doesn't overly know how to do it necessarily. Okay, he knows to sit on the throne, but he really doesn't, for the most part, know how to necessarily handle himself as the leader. And Fennec is actually the one being like, I think you should do this, I think you should do that. And he's just very sort of frustrated by the whole situation, because he's trying to be reasonable with people, but then the second he's not being the sort of fear me type guy, they try to take advantage of him. That's the sort of approach. And so how is he going to make them have that level of respect for him, but out of proper respect and not fear? Can that actually happen, or is it always going to be the case where people dealing with like crime bosses, this is just the dynamic that has to be the case? You could see that with the mayor sending their sort of like assistant in their place, and not just that they don't have any tribute for Boba Fett as the new leader, but that this guy's trying to like reverse it and have Boba pay tribute to the mayor, just because he's willing to talk a little bit. And you can sort of see the idea of like, you know, you give them an inch, they'll take a mile type situation. And that's why Fennec is constantly stressing, you need to be stronger, you need to be tougher, to, you know, be the leader here. And I suppose, you know, how exactly the fact that they had like a very public fight where I suppose Boba was shown to struggle and need the help of both like Fennec and both of the Gamorrean guards as well. That was maybe significant in terms of like, are people now going to view him as being weak or vulnerable, and try to kill him all the more because this group nearly took him out? Now, it was a pretty clever approach here of just getting these, 6 guys in to surround him with energy shields and pretty much give no opening for him to use any of his weaponry or anything like that. So it was all down to hand-to-hand combat. And this is where the advice that if he took Fennec's advice and just sort of, I suppose, executed the Gamorrean guards, he wouldn't have got out of that situation, because those 2 Gamorreans ended up being really clutch in the end, because their sort of brute strength was what sort of like gave the opening that sort of separated the kind of shield wall. So that was cool to see, just getting across the idea of like, I suppose, Gamorrean brute strength and the unique aspects of different species is key. So I like that you had elements of it where him not taking Fennec's advice was bad for him, but then aspects of like, oh, some things work out, of like, these 2 guards were loyal to both of their previous masters. What's to say they won't be loyal to a third? And they were, because he trusted them enough to put him in the Bacta thing, and they did. So that's kind of cool. I wonder will we get more with these 2 Gamorreans, and so on. There was a quick scene where, like, obviously they go into the sort of kind of cantina thing. We get a few references there to some characters we haven't seen in quite a while. But it's mainly to introduce the sort of like Twi'lek kind of person who runs the bar, who she does pay tribute, but there's a sense for like almost she sees that she maybe can take advantage of Boba as well because he's being more reasonable than they expect. And I think that's going to be part of the theme of these early episodes, is just him realizing what he can and can't do and the exact way to do things. And from a lot of the trailers, I think we've seen exactly this. We're going to see a lot of kind of meetings with leaders where he surprisingly lets them speak, surprisingly lets people live when they maybe would have been killed otherwise. That's sort of a dynamic. So yeah, overall, really good opening. Definitely surprised me because I went in sort of like excited because so far the Disney Plus shows for Star Wars have been very good. But I did have my doubts about some aspects of this. I still do with this show because I don't know how strong, I suppose, the main present day plot is going to be. Just because I don't really have much of a sense for where we're going until they start to, I suppose, reveal a lot of the bigger connections that they're going to do. And this gets into stuff like, you know, imagine like the Mandalorian season 2 if it didn't have sort of the other Mandalorians, if it didn't have Boba Fett, if it didn't have Ahsoka. If you take away a lot of those connections into other things that are really interesting, just, you know, you take away a huge aspect of what makes that show so good. And I think it's similar here, where I think they've teased that there's going to be huge, interesting stuff in every episode. And I don't really have much of a sense for exactly what that's going to be just yet. But that just means that the next episodes can really surprise me because I don't know what to expect from them outside of just general crime boss sort of shenanigans. So they're my thoughts on the episode. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were, but that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.